Welcome to Oppsell, where top sales legends reveal the playbooks they hardly ever share. With your host, Wilson Dike,
Sales solution experts. It's real talk, real strategy.
starting now.
Hello, everyone. Welcome to today's episode. And we have an esteemed or distinguished guest who has been in the trenches of sales, come up tops, who has a lot of experience under his belt. He has sold in multiple regions. He has sold in multiple legislations. And now he is a leader. He's a mentor. He's an instructor. He's a trainer. He is also building the next set of young talents coming out of Africa. Let me make welcome to Dr. Rutendo Hwindingwi. Please, Doctor, introduce yourself and you're welcome.
And Wilson, thank you very much, and absolute pleasure. You really make me blush with your introduction, my brother from another mother. But excited to be here. My name is Dr. Rutendo Hwindingwi. I'm the CEO and founder of Tribe Africa Advisory, which is a boutique firm that works with regards to facilitating deals on Africa, bringing investors, investees. But my background is technology, leadership, business development, and really excited with regards to being part of the population that is taking Africa to the next level. And drawing from my own experience, having worked in corporate with notable companies like Deloitte, Sage, and YNV Group. So excited to be here and to be sharing some great insights with you, Wilson.
Thank you, Doctor. And like I said earlier, he has a lot of experience under his belt. So please, Doctor, your presence here is highly appreciated. And I'd like to go straight into it, right? We're looking at your journey, from Africa, because I said I started from Africa, you started from Africa as well, but now you are a world leader. You have conferences, you have conversations, you bring investors into Africa from all over the globe. I'd like you to tell us, what motivated you to pursue a career in sales, because it all started in sales. So, your Africa to global tech stage. Tell us what motivated you to get into sales. Did you envisage that this is where you'd be? Or was it something out of curiosity?
That's a very good question, Wilson. And sometimes people say, life deals you a certain hand and you make the most of it. Believe it or not, when I first left school, my first job was actually as an auditor at Deloitte. So I was going a career where I was going to be an auditor. I did audit for about 3.5 years. And it wasn't my personality, it wasn't my character, but it was an opportunity that came to me and I took it. And I went through a journey of moving from audit then to IT, and I was involved in technology, but more as a systems analyst, focused with an accounting system, but not doing sales at all. So I moved from being an auditor to a systems analyst in a big corporate, and that was in Zimbabwe at the time. And then I eventually started working for a niche consulting company that implemented business management software. They sold, they implemented, they supported, and I was a support technical person. And that's why you always appreciate where you came from. So I used to sit on the call center answering calls in terms of support. And funny enough, in regards to sales, when you are doing support calls, you actually have to sell a solution to a client, because the client is telling you they've got a problem. There's no monetary transaction that you're doing, but you have to give them that peace of mind. You have to give them the time. And I think I was good with that. I used to listen, even if I didn't know the technical details. I used to manage the situation well. And when I was working for that small consulting company, it was called CHIPS Computing Services, which you probably know, a big Sage distributor in Zimbabwe. And the MD at the time, who over the years became a good friend of mine, said to me, look, there's a vacancy in the sales department, and I just think you've got the personality and the persona. So he moved into the sales department, and I remember my first sale was to a financial services company. It was for one module. I think it was a debtors module. Never done a transaction before, but it was my first sale, and the rest is history. From there, I became the new business manager. Eventually, I was a general manager because of my leadership skills. And then eventually I walked down the path where I relocated, came to South Africa, was part of AMIA. And my sales career just blossomed from just being a new business executive to leading the channel, then to managing for the AMIA region for Middle East, Australia, and Asia, a leadership role. And by the time I left Sage and went to Deloitte, I was always, now obviously I was a director, and as a director I'm more involved in strategic sales. But I've always enjoyed the sales space, especially in terms of the solution selling, the enterprise selling, because I like those kind of sales because they draw the best out of you in terms of thinking and applying yourself, as opposed to the quick turnaround. So, and over the years, I've probably done business in over 30 African countries. I've done all over the world, from the US to the Middle East to the UK to Australia, Asia to China. And you realize the fundamentals are all the same, but ultimately a sale is a sale. So that's more or less the long and short of it, Wilson.
Yeah, I mean that's quite interesting. And to the others listening, I mean, Rutendo is being quite humble with all he's done, because he has touched around. But I can say for sure, because we our paths crossed while I was working with Sage, and he was a business leader in Sage as well, and I also understood what it took for him to excel and where what he was doing, and it's no surprise that he is where he is at this point in time, because right from the time it was all about excellence, and up until now he's still preaching excellence and moving on to that. But there's a question I'd like to ask in terms of your experience. I see that like you rightly said, you have worked in different countries, in different regions, continents. What was the striking difference in terms of sales culture, personal culture, organizational culture across Africa, Europe, Middle East, Australia? What was something that was a culture shock to you when you were trying to sell into these markets?
Yeah, no, you bring a very important point, and I think the thing about selling is, there's this saying in business studies that people always buy from people. It doesn't matter what product you have, you're buying from a person. And for you to buy from a person, you have to resonate with them. And for you to resonate with them, you have to understand them at their level. And at their level, you're not talking about based on their qualification or based on technical items, but more in terms of what are the key triggers that make that person make a decision. So there's the general stuff in terms of budget, analyzing the circumstances, understanding the technical details. But when it comes to different cultures and races, so for example, I'll give you 3 or 4 different scenarios. I'm from Zimbabwe. The head office was in South Africa, and in Southern Africa there's a certain culture that is there, and I was responsible for Africa, Middle East, and Australasia. So if you look at the rest of Africa, let's say West and East Africa, because I used to oversee the sales team in Nigeria, which was under West Africa, and East Africa, primarily with the head office or sub-head office in Kenya. Nigeria, culture dynamics, very entrepreneurial, very big, very competitive because of the population, very aggressive, but in a good sense. I mean, you remember we're in the Nigerian office. You guys were very, very front-footed just in terms of your approach, and very knowledgeable. So you had to go into that market knowing that this is the environment, this is the space, and adjust there. And I've published 2 books, one called Rumble in the Jungle Reloaded, and the other one called Reflections of the Son of a Soul. And I talk about my experiences around this and some learnings from that. We go to East Africa, totally different culture that happens in that market. And again, you need to understand those different dynamics, where the people are, the background that they come from, and understanding in terms of all that component. You go to the Middle East, obviously very Arabic by the nature of the Middle East. The place, it's a very geographically, Middle East not as big as Africa, but the wealth per capita is huge because of oil. So when you go there and you're trying to sell something for R1 or $1, $20, the guys are saying, where we don't get scared by small numbers, by big numbers. If it meets the job, we'll pay for it. So you had to operate at a different level. Then obviously the international market, the rest of, like the US, the UK, their perceptions of Africa is obviously we're not as an advanced economy. So when you're selling to clients in that space, even though you're selling an international tried and tested product, you're also having to deal with that perception that you're coming from an underdeveloped country, selling to a developed country. So those are the different kind of dynamics. So it's hard, but I think what I enjoyed is that when you're able to know that those are the different dynamics and understand the people, because ultimately, whether you are selling to a Chinese person, a Nigerian, a Kenyan, an American, Australian, an Indian, you're dealing with people. And when you understand that that in itself gives you a firm foundation.
Yes. So I'd like to just throw in something. Do you think psychology has a part to play, or is an asset for a salesperson?
100%, because I'm not trying to get complex. I mean, my theory is that whether you are selling a toothbrush at a spa, it's a spaza shop. When I say spaza shop, I'm saying a little tuck shop in the township, a toothbrush.
Yes.
And whether you're selling $100 million car, first and foremost, the sales process is actually the same. What just is different is the duration as well as the investment. And why do I say this? When you're selling a toothbrush to a person at a spaza shop, the person comes into the shop, they've got a need. You have to address the need and convince them that the solution you have in the toothbrush is better than them going to the other spaza shop. Even though you're going to sell it to them, let's say for $1, the transaction itself and the whole sales process might take 30 seconds, or it might take 14 minutes. Very short, because I mean, it's not a long stretch. But the process of understanding their requirement, connecting to them, convincing them, and closing the deal for that $1 is the same process with regards to selling $100 million car. The only difference now is the time and the process, because the person might say, okay, let me test drive it. You can't test drive it.
Yeah.
If you have to test driving a toothbrush,
Yes.
then, but in Africa, some things you'll be shocked to happen. But the duration and the process is different. And the person might say, okay, but why should I buy it compared to this? And then they might want to test other cars. And they might say, okay, what are the financing options? So the process might be a bit more complex. But ultimately, the sales guy is still trying to convince an individual that this is the right solution. Obviously, when you look at it from a corporate perspective, there are more stakeholders involved, there are more people involved, there's more input, but ultimately you're trying to convince one or two key decision makers at what addresses the need that they've got to ultimately make that. So the steps might be more complex the bigger the deal, but at the end of the day, if you think about it, you're trying to convince individuals to address a solution that you believe you've got the best compared to your competitors, and that's really it.
Yes. So psychology is quite key, and you can't underrate psychology. Yeah.
Yeah, and that's why, maybe just to add, sorry to interrupt you, is that I remember I used to go for these sales courses, and one of them that I went to, the guys, they said, do you know that there is no degree for sales? If you think about it, there's a degree for accounting, for procurement, for every HR, every functionality.
Yes.
That you can think of if you do an organogram of a business, purchasing, sales, accounts, engineering, all of those you can probably trace to a specific degree, but there is no degree. You might even find a training course for sales, but there's no degree for sales. And I think the reality is that sales is not about functionality. Even if you are not in an office face fronting environment, you still have to sell if you're an HR person. So it actually highlights how intrinsic it is in any operation. And that's why you can't actually, selling is the lifeblood of any organization, and hence the point. So I just wanted to add that, my friend.
Yeah, that's quite important, and it's good that you stress it out, because I mean, unless if things have changed, rarely do you see people going to school to learn how to sell. I'll spend 4 years in the four walls of a university learning selling, because selling is diverse, it morphs, and it morphs to the circumstances or the solutions or products you're selling. But what we know as human beings is that we are born to sell. So there are people that chase it professionally by learning, or people that just have it, in hiding or in a hidden state in themselves. But we, as human beings, sell every day we get up. We sell ourselves in one way or the other. When we're talking, we're asking for questions. We're trying to sell ourselves. But when people take it a notch up is when they go professional and start selling products or services that will impact businesses and lives of people. So that's a good thing you mentioned. Now let's look into the other ones. You were looking at because you have also advanced and you've had good success stories in emerging markets such as in Africa, like what we have in Africa. Majority of the countries in Africa are emerging markets. As a matter of fact, Africa as a continent is an emerging market. So winning sales strategies in this market, I would like to ask, what are the unique challenges when selling in emerging markets? What are the things that you have experienced so far?
Okay, so let me talk from the background, because again, it depends on the product. Infrastructure, you'll be selling technology, but let me leverage off technology and services broadly. I think the first thing is, obviously, Africa as a continent, we don't have a lot of money. We're 3% of global GDP. So that means the US's economy is 10 times the size of Africa combined. So what I'm just highlighting is that by default, we're a price-sensitive market. People will tell you, oh, we're not price-sensitive, but we don't have a lot of money. So when you come into the African space, you've got the volumes, because we've got, by 2050, we will have 50% of the world's population of the continent. We've got the people that consume, but we don't have the money compared to the things. So it creates an interesting, and this is the usual trend in your emerging markets, whether it's India, whether it's Brazil, China. Having said that, when you're looking at solutions, there's a lot of money that will be prioritized in terms of the impact that you make. So in other words, if you've got a solution that is effective and efficient, the more impact you can make in terms of demographics, in terms of inclusivity, in terms of scalability, the more of a chance. Because if you think about it, if you've got a solution that is easy to scale and make the right kind of impact more cost effectively. Yes, there are people who always want the more expensive stuff, but they're not in their big numbers. Then in this day and age, that will make a difference. So whether you're selling accounting solutions for big organizations, the guys that will always be saying, okay, with the limited budget that we've got, how can we make sure that we optimize the best return on this? So that's always a big thing. If you go into more affluent markets, whether it's a Singapore, whether it's a first world country, the guys will actually say, okay, the issue is not about high impact, it's more in terms of high value and return. So just from an Africa perspective, those are the things I've picked up. And also what's relevant, I think there's a bigger drive now. People are looking for solutions when you're selling to them that actually are not just about the profit. People talk about planet, but more inclusivity. So in other words, people are more sensitized in Africa now, saying, okay, we know historically women and youth have been not been included in terms of getting the big slice of the African cake.
Yes.
How can the solution accommodate that or help us to achieve that? People are more aware of that. People are also looking for solutions because, as I said, Africa's population is huge, but our GDP size is small. So how can what you're selling us to a certain extent allow me to be able to tap into the global wealth? And that's especially in the technology sense. So if you give an organization, because remember, technology, especially after COVID, was a key driver in terms of growth. People realizing, okay, we can now go into markets traditionally that would have had to get into a plane into and go there and pitch. But now using technology, using Facebook, using TikTok, whatever, now we've got ChatGPT, I can actively serve and receive from those markets without being there. So one statistic, for example, is that the penetration of the internet, which is an indicator of technology penetration in the rest of the world, is plus or minus 17% in the next 5 years. Africa, in terms of technology penetration, is 52%. Yes, it's coming off a low base, but what it's just highlighting is the role of technology in terms of the impact of the continent. And when you bring that into the sales environment, you realize, okay, whether you're receiving, buying, or selling, if technology is not being used and what technology opens up to, it can be very competitive. Your competitor as a salesperson or as a sales product today or tomorrow could be somebody coming from Tasmanian Island in Australia.
Yes.
Not Africa, but what they've done is they've Googled, they've understood that, Wilson Dike is a Niger boy, he's based in Nigeria, he likes this kind of outfits. That person goes into China, he Googles that kind of outfit, he just throws what is, then the next thing you find it on your machine, you're working, and then hey Wilson, there's a 20% discount if you buy this through Temu, and you say, but that's exactly what I've been looking at.
Absolutely.
accelerating things. But you get what I'm saying? The dynamics have changed. But what are they doing? They've understood your need and they're addressing it specifically to you. And that person is not physically there. So these are all the complexities around that, but also it highlights the opportunities.
Yes, it highlights the opportunities that technology has brought forth. And just to also buttress, surprisingly, I get to see, my traditional attire on Temu. And I'm like, Temu is a Chinese company. So how do they know that these are the fittings I look at? So like you rightly said, they have, used technology to understand my preferences. And with that, they can now start throwing up suggestions for me, hoping that one day, I look into it, I engage them, and I say, okay, let me give it a try.
100%.
So that's the role of technology, and this happened, and this took flight right after or within the pandemic, where people were locked in and started asking, what are we going to do with our lives? What are we going to do with our businesses? And technology came to the fray. So it's really important that you highlighted that. So now for looking at it again, I'm looking at partnership, because you can't as a salesperson and trying to get into a new market because you have sold in different markets. I'd like to ask the role local partnerships play, when you're trying to successfully enter a market difficult to enter, or a market new to your terrain.
Yeah, very important. Partnerships are very important. Now, I'll give you an example again. Yeah, I've used it in my book, because in my book, Rumble in the Jungle Reloaded, I talk about the Tito up to the power of RD framework, and the T stands for understanding your territory.
Yes.
I is innovation, T always threats and opportunities, and RD is resilience and determination. All of those key, and I've talked about innovation a bit around technology, and I leverage the book framework from that famous fight, Muhammad Ali and George Foreman, Rumble in the Jungle, that happened in the DRC. But if you've read the history of that fight, and God bless his soul, George Foreman passed away.
Sadly, a couple of days ago.
Yeah, so great story. But if you follow that story, and one of the reasons Muhammad Ali, who was the underdog, won the fight, was that if he came into the DRC, remember both fighters had never fought a fight like that in a place like that before. He came in a few weeks earlier into Zaire, which is now DRC. And although he was the underdog, he connected with the people, he won their hearts. He got to understand them. In comparison to George Foreman, who was already the world boxing champion, he didn't connect and engage with the guys to the same extent, such that on the day of the fight, even before the fight began, Muhammad Ali had already won the hearts of the people. Before the fight began. So why is this relevant? Coming back to your point, is that for you to understand the market and the dynamics and the cultures and the nuances of that market, you can only understand it to a certain extent as an external person. But I'm from Zimbabwe, you're from Nigeria. You live and breathe Nigeria, just like I've lived and breathed Zimbabwe. So it actually, for me to come into that market, and remember, it goes back to people do business with people. Doesn't matter if you're here. There's the cultural element in terms of connecting with the local people. You understand the dynamics. You want to win them over because they will do half of the work for you. It doesn't mean that you cannot get people to work in that market, but if you're going to a new market, you want to push your product, leverage off the strength. Two, over the years, where Africa is now compared to where it was in any country, it applies, but I'm just using Africa because we're in Africa. Yeah. Where Africa is as a continent post, the slave trade, post colonialism, post all that history, people are more knowledgeable. People are more educated, people are more equipped, people are more proactive, people are more entrepreneurial. So when you go into a market and you want to sell a product, and you want to come in and not leverage off that capability, that knowledge, that expertise, that competitive local presence, you're actually putting yourself at an disadvantage. And you've seen it when even though Sage, a UK multinational, wanted to open up in Nigeria, which it did, but we leveraged off the channel, which are the business partners that were already existing in the country. Because why? Because they've already got the relationships, they've got the networks, and if they go to a fellow Nigerian and say, we're representing this brand, it's an easier sell than somebody coming and saying, no, my name, etc., etc. Now, the exceptions, yes, they're international brands. You don't take that away. People want them. But the other thing is, coming back to my point about people are more knowledgeable. People are also realizing, gosh, there are things that we are entitled to because we are local. It's home ground. So when a person comes into our market, it has to be a win-win. It can't just be one way. So there are more conscious people in the existing market. And the only way you can leverage and learn from them and use that to advantage is by engaging them. So to cut a long story short, partnerships, obviously they're not always perfect how they work out, but they're absolutely critical in terms of allowing you to be successful in that market.
Oh yes, yeah, that's true. I mean, like you rightly said, using the reference of Rumble in the Jungle, I like the fact that Muhammad Ali had to go in before win the hearts, and that was a winning strategy because already the locals had him as a favorite.
Yeah.
So that's a good strategy, and bringing that back to sales, and getting into a new terrain is important to get into the markets with familiar faces, which are the partners that already have these customers, these people as customers, and can easily sell to them, which also shortens the sales cycle. Because I can imagine going into a new country and without prior information, without any network whatsoever, and trying to sell or trying to break the doors open. It will happen, but it just elongates the sales cycle. And people that already have the network and connections will just go straight up and, of course, take the market share you're trying to get a piece of. Oh yeah, that's great. That's great. So now looking at that again, I see that you above and beyond this, you are also very big on branding. You're also big on branding for sales success. Before I even go further, it's also good to note here that Rutendo made mention of being an author of books. I will put the links to the books where you can purchase them on the comments or on the section just below this podcast. So once you get them, I'll get the links. You can just go in and purchase any of his books. So going back to this, we're looking at the role of personal branding in sales success, right? Why do you think it's important to brand, for someone to have a brand, especially as a sales professional today?
Yeah, so it's a very good point. And I always say to people, first there's the product or the solution you're selling, and that always got its own brand, which is great. But that product, and how do you differentiate that product? You differentiate it from its competitors by highlighting its key features. But that in itself is not enough, because if you say to yourself, okay, if 5 other people are selling this brand, why should they? So imagine you're a Mercedes dealership. There's not only one Mercedes dealership in the country or in the region. There'll be 2 or 5 other people who will be selling that Mercedes. And you're selling the same product, different countries, but you're different areas. But what differentiates that? And I'm trying to use this as an example in terms of why it's important to brand yourself, is that whatever you do, whatever offering you have, you're taking, whether it's a product, whether it's a service, ultimately, over and above that, you need to differentiate yourself to say, why would a person buy from me? And that's the question you answer by branding. In terms of a person is saying, why will I buy from Rutendo? Why should I buy from Wilson? And then that's where your personal brand comes into place, in terms of you have found, everybody's unique, but what you're doing by branding is getting that uniqueness and positioning it, that you use it as a tool. And that's why it's important, because now a person saying, no, I will buy from Wilson because as an individual, he's not loud, he's understanding, he listens, he cares, he's passionate about X, Y, and Z, and this is what represents him. And when he brings the product, I know that brand. So when you talk about branding, you have to talk about integrity, in terms of, I know that he's reputable because of X, Y, and Z. It's not just about the product. It gets to a point where people are actually buying from you, not because of the product you sell, but because of the credibility you bring. And then you have taken things to the next level. And I've seen that with clients. Clients who come to me, sometimes it's something I've never, ever sold in my life, because now with my own business, I'm focusing across a number of sectors, industries, in terms of the deals. But just because they trust me, and they say, no, Rutendo stands for X, Y, and Z. This is who he is. This is what he stands for. They won't say, this is what your brand stands for. They'll say, this is what you stand for. They'll believe you, but we trust you. So it's part and parcel of differentiating yourself, making yourself competitive. But branding is about not being artificial. It's more in terms of you're positioning yourself in the market based in terms of your strengths and your capabilities, so people can complement that with whatever you're offering them to buy. So that's absolutely critical, and that's how it has worked for me, and I would recommend working for others as well.
Oh yeah, that's great. So I'd like to ask, so what's the first step, to creating a credible brand as a sales professional? What do you need to do first? Because you see that branding is very crucial. You need to have a very strong brand, like you rightly said. When people sell solutions, what differentiates you from the other salesman is your brand. Because we could well agree that the service that you have, the other salesman has the same service in the product that he's selling. And what would tilt towards you is your brand, which is credibility, like you rightly highlighted. So, but as a salesperson, thinking of listening to this conversation, he might be asking, what's the first thing I need to do to get build a solid brand as a salesperson?
Yeah. So I think first and foremost is know who you are and be confident in that. So you understand in terms of you're a salesperson, but understand who you are and what your strength is. So if your strengths and your weaknesses as well, because you might be a person who's very loud, which is great in terms of if you are in an event and you want to get messages across. But then if you're not a good listener, so understand who you are and what your capabilities are, your strengths and your weaknesses. Right? Branding is about bringing your strong point.
Yes.
Because that's what people, you don't go to a person and say, I'm selling you this, but my weaknesses are X, Y, and Z. People walk away with you. When you go, you say, look, guys, my name is Rutendo. My passion is providing solutions that meet a client's requirements. I'm an individual. There are personal things. I like soccer, etc., etc. But find out what is unique about you, because you're connecting to people. Yes. That when you talk to people in terms of the products and the solution you're offering. So, for example, you and I used to sell accounting software. The accountants, your biggest decision maker when you're selling accounting, business management software, 95 or most of the time is your CFOs. Your chief financial officers or your finance directors. And their responsibility in an organization is that they need to give credible results or reports or data out of the system. So when you understand where they are, when you go to them, you want to convince them to provide them with a solution that address their needs. They need to make sure that not only is your product trusted, that are you trustworthy? Are you credible? Can they feel that? And so when you walk into their office, it's not just about your strengths, but also how you portray yourself, how you communicate. If you're walking in, you know about it. We used to be sticklers in terms of ties, suits, etc. Because you think about yourself, you walk into a CFO's office and you look like you've just come out of a party in the middle of Asia. The guys will say, and then tomorrow this guy is going to spend money for his financial statements, which is going to be audited by Pricewaterhouse, which is going to be then published in a board report that is going to go on the New York Stock Exchange because it's a multinational. And the guys, when things go patient, says, who was the person who sold you this software that you are relying on? Then he points to you. So they seem like little things, but they all compete. Before they even got to that, it talks about your brand. And then your brand is also in terms of your network, how it resonates. So people will say, okay, the CFO might be at a luncheon with other CFOs. Then he's told, oh, Wilson is coming to my office to pitch me about ERP software. And the guy will say, his reputation, that guy. The last time when he was working in another company, he sold me a dud. I don't know if you get what I'm saying.
Yeah,
so
I do.
branding talks about those characteristics of you that make who you are, that are your strong points, but give people and the confidence to be able to trust you with integrity. For me, I'm not a brand specialist, but when you think about a brand, it's saying, okay, the brand, and I don't mind now. In the old days, I used to worry about it. If my brand is related to expense or a cost in terms of price that is not cheap, but it relates to quality, then that's okay. Because there are certain shops you go to whereby you'll say, why am I buying this cheap thing from this expensive shop? Or why am I buying this expensive thing from this cheap shop? It's all brand perception. So it boils down in terms of what you represent and how you want to represent it to give the confidence that will instill confidence to the person who's going to buy from you.
Okay, interesting. That's good. That's very good. So perception matters. Integrity is one key thing, and
Yeah.
you need to dress the way you want to be addressed. That's quite key
And
because
value. And
yeah,
value.
and value,
Absolutely, I cannot value the value you bring with your brand. You know, if people have a perception that you are cheap, then that's the value they expect to get from you. Once you look cheap or feel cheap or are perceived cheap, but you want to be expensive, it's gonna confuse them. And I'm not saying you don't negotiate. You know, sales are about negotiating, bringing the price down, arguing, negotiating, etc., etc. But you actually want to bring. At the end of the day, people are saying, what is the value I'm going to get out of this? And is it worth it based not only on the product and the service, but also on the individual who's giving it to me? And they all have to correlate.
Interesting. Very, very good insights there, Rutendo. Okay, so let's go into the next section of this, and that is, the sales war stories. I need to understand the things that you've done before, your big wins, your big losses. There are two key questions I'd like to ask, and the first one is what the most challenging deal you have ever closed was, and why do you signal that as your most challenging deal ever closed?
Sure, there are a number, but maybe the one was with I won't mention the specific name, but it was a Pan-African company that dealt with they sold glass. But when I say they sold glass, they manufactured to a certain extent, but they sold glass literally for cars in terms of car windows and glass in terms of your house. So the glass, so put them into the FMCG for glass, but more in the bigger volumes. And they were across a number of countries. And one of the products that they needed an ERP solution that allowed them to be able to sell in different countries at a point of sale. And then it been consolidated at office. So quite straightforward. But one thing about the glass industry is that if you think about it, when you walk around, glass is not a standard product. It's a standard material, but if you're building your house today, you don't build your house to fit the glass that's on the market. You'll have some windows that are 10 square centimeters. You'll have French doors. For your car, it's not standard. So when selling, clients have got the option of choosing different variations. And when you now want to invoice and bill and account for that from a stock management, from a resale, I'm not going to get too technical. There's a lot of complexity. And we misunderstood the level of complexity when we're selling to the client. So when the opportunity to sell, it was like millions of dollars. It was a great opportunity. We got a third-party software developer to customize some of the components from India. If you remember, Winjet, great partners we had. You remember that story? But we underestimated the level of complexity. So when we sold and we understood the client in the sales process, and remember, I only understood this later. In the hype of the sale and the size of the deal, we thought we had it. And through the process, the client was trying to emphasize, guys, this is a complex, our business is complex. And because we just thought it was glass, we underestimated until we got into implementation. And when the final details began to come out, and you can relook the process of, we can always also say to ourselves, we didn't understand their requirements clearly, but the clients had confidence in us. We had a brand with capacity. But the nightmare was that because by then I was obviously a divisional head, so you're responsible for the sale, but you're also responsible for the delivery. Mm-hmm. It was a great lesson that even though we got millions of dollars in terms of the sale, we also lost millions because of the implementation. But the lesson there was, don't take for granted the complexity highlighted by the client when you're in the sales process. So it was a Pan-African deal. It was the glass space. I remember sometimes working until midnight with the guys in India in trying to bring fixes to the technology to address the client's needs that we hadn't picked up in the beginning. And also now the client takes advantage of you. So that's one example of a nightmare kind of a sale in terms of it was good monies. It was a great opportunity. There was another we did in Angola whereby it was a great deal. It was a distributor for Unilever, probably one of the biggest in the region. It was going to be it was going to grow to like $2 or $3 million US for the whole of Africa. And we had People were involved from Lebanon, Angola, South Africa, Portugal, and there was a lot of complexity, but also there was a lot of backstabbing. And I remember we eventually went live for 1 month after the software was launched, only to find out the IT manager was working in the background to destabilize the software. And when we actually closed and we wrote off the system, and we said to the client, that's it, let's just pay each other the money. Soon after that, the IT manager, who we thought was working with us, launched his own system and sold it to the client. So that's one of the horror stories. But one of the stories, maybe a good, was it was a jewelry company in Zimbabwe, my home country, and they were the part of the Reserve Bank, and they manufactured and processed gold, as well as they were responsible for printing the passports for the country, etc., etc. It was my first major deal over R1 million that I closed, and it was because we worked with the clients. It was government. It was dealing with the delicate product of gold, diamonds, passports. Even they printed cash for the government as well. So it was a very delicate sale, but I think the reason we were successful, we understood the client, we worked the journey with him, they trusted us. But when they closed the deal, it was so smooth, and even the rest of the other countries didn't understand that. But that was another one that was a great sale, and that I remember specifically.
Oh, interesting history, interesting, stories and events. And I'm sure that there are sales in your experience that were going bad, and you had to step in to make it turn a corner. Do you have any you want to share? An experience where a sale was going bad, but you had to do something to make it turn a corner and get into a client?
Yeah, I'm trying to think. Look, I think one was maybe when I was at Deloitte. We're doing a big project with African Bank, and it was quite complex because there was something that they wanted to. It was an institute. There was a big project that they wanted to invest in across Africa, and they brought us in to work with them with regards to, they'd be working with another partner, but they wanted us to come in and partner. And because of Deloitte's, as project managers, our reputation, our credibility comes back to that. They brought us in. And I think because of the background, the experience, the branding that we had, I was able to go there, understand where they were coming from as an organization, see the shortfalls the other organization that was servicing them had, and not to where we didn't come in there and undermine the other partner that they had, but we came in and we reinforced that. And it was, I say to people, I think what got us to get them convinced and to commit in terms of taking the project to the next level was the fact that we manage the politics. And sometimes what it is, where there are a lot of stakeholders, especially in the more complex projects or opportunities, it's managing the stakeholders, managing the politics, understanding where everybody's coming from. And I give that example where I talked about the toothbrush compared to the $100 million car. The difference is with the more complex sales, it's not that people are not involved. It's not that you don't need to understand where people are coming from. It's just that there are more than one stakeholders. The expectations are are different. They're more complex and integrated. And it's when you're coming in and integrating that in itself differentiates you. And I think it goes down to my capabilities and my strengths as well. I know I'm good in terms of managing people, connecting, getting them to work together, and navigating them through the complexity. And that is an example. And I obviously can't go into details of the deal, but African Bank, plays a key role on the continent. And this other partner that they had, were with them, able to give the client peace of mind and take the project forward to the next level. And then I left later on because of another opportunity happened in my career. But where we made significant milestones was because of that working collaboration and navigating the politics, which is also a key thing in terms of sales, managing and securing sales opportunities.
Oh yeah, that's very good. Very good to know. So I'd like to ask, as we're wrapping up, coming to the end of the session, I'd like to quickly ask a couple of things. Yes, you are also well versed. You train and mentor people, but your career, how what role did mentorship play in your career? Can you just share?
Yeah, it's not what role it play, what role is it playing?
Ah,
Mentorship, absolutely critical. People use mentorship as this magical word. Mentorship is just you humbling yourself, saying, I need to learn from other people. And I can't just learn from one person. So, for you to develop and grow, you're always learning from something. Even the richest people, if you speak to Aliko Dangote today, there are people he'll sit to and he'll learn from and understand. Yes, he teaches, he learns, makes people learn, but it's learning and saying, how do I get better? How can I equip myself better? And there's no better way to do it than from understanding from other people who've gone a similar journey of done that. So for me, absolutely critical. You're always there to learn. It's an ongoing process. You can never stop learning. And I always say to people, don't limit yourself learning from one person, because you are unique. And also, one person doesn't know everything. There might be elements of business from a finance perspective, might learn from somebody. There might be elements of business from a political perspective, how to deal with politics, you must learn from somebody. There might be elements from the technical side, you might learn from somebody. Be open, be confident in yourself, but never stop learning. So for me, mentoring, absolutely critical. And for me, I'm always trying to make sure I've got people giving me the right input in the right way.
Oh yeah, that's interesting. So mentorship and mentoring is an ongoing exercise. Provided that you're a professional, just keep getting mentored, keep getting into mentorship programs, keep teaching people, keep getting
100%.
ready to be taught. And as far as you live, you have air going through your lungs. Keep learning.
Yeah.
That's the only way you get better, right?
100%.
Okay, great. So one final question. What advice would you have for people trying to get into sales careers, especially those from underserved backgrounds? Say you coming from an audit background, someone else might be thinking from audit tax, or even from social sciences background. What advice do you have for them or to them when trying to make that career switch after listening to you today?
That's a good question, yeah, because as I said, I didn't start off in the sales space. My advice would be, first of all, in terms of the general version of sales, first of all, are you able to do it? Because there are people who are salespeople, there are people who are not salespeople. So one, are you able to do the sales? And once you've defined that and said, okay, you're able to do the sales, you're able to approach people, to position solutions, offering products, then you say to yourself, so that the most important, identify and make sure you're able to do it, and then say, how can I make myself a better salesperson? Yes, there are courses that are there. There are no degrees.
Yeah.
Sales is really practical. There are courses that are there. But you don't have to start off with the course. Start saying to yourself, how do I sell products, or how do I sell services? And I remember we used to have this process that I learned from another individual when they used to come for sales interviews, and you say to them, if you're really wanting a sales job, you give them their phone, or you give them your phone, you say, sell me your phone, and let's just pretend. Something like that. It shows you if you've got the DNA for sales. But first and foremost, is it something you want to do? Two, is it something that when the heat is on and the pressure is on, you're still able to sell? Because you and I know sales is not easy. Like any hobby, it's not hard, it's not easy. There are times when it's easy, there's times when it's hard, but are you willing to put the work in? Are you willing to live beyond disappointments? Are you willing to take the pressure? Because there are people who live and die for that. And if you identify all those things and you're saying, I'm able to do all these things and I'm willing to do it, then go for it, apply for the job. But it's not just about applying. I say to people, even before you apply, even if you're in HR, you want to go into sales, say to yourself, can I sell the HR concept to a non-HR person and get them to understand and appreciate it? Because sometimes it's not about money being exchanged. It's just in terms of, are you able to put a value proposition in front of somebody to convince them to make a decision to accept that value proposition? Once you're able to do that, then you're able for the sales game.
Right. That's very, very solid nuggets there. So, it's not about just selling or transferring money, but can you transfer value and get people listening to what you're saying understand the concept and run with that concept. That is the
100%.
key thing. And these are things that people need to start practicing. Like I do say, when you are getting or thinking of getting into the sales ecosystem as a sales professional, try selling, try having conversations, try, starting up conversations with strangers at the park, strangers at the bus stations or the train stations or the airports, and try to have meaningful conversations. That way you
100%.
can gauge and start building and fighting against, all the stage fright and all the stuttering that you might have to deal with. Okay, so one final thing I'd like to ask, if people listening to you today or have listened to you or will listen to you and say, hey, I'd like to get to know more about Rutendo, how do we connect with you?
Yeah. So you can go on my LinkedIn. And then my LinkedIn, Dr. Rutendo Hwindingwi. You can search for me on LinkedIn. And then I've got my own website, www.rutendohwindingwi.com. You can also go there. And very soon we'll be launching a YouTube. There are a series of videos I've done, more focusing in terms of the broader aspects of sales, business development, and doing business in Africa. That'll be available soon on YouTube. But if you connect to me on my platforms, you'll be able to see from there. So that's more or less it. And looking forward to engaging with your network, Wilson. And thank you very much for having me on your show. I really appreciate it, man.
Yeah, sure. Thank you, Doctor, for your time. It was well worth it. It was quite interesting. All your links and socials will be on the podcast episode, so please don't worry. Even the links to your books, we'll put that in there so that people can engage and, of course, get a copy for them. So that will be all for today's episode. Thank you all for listening. I'll see you all on the next one. But for now, thank you, Rutendo, and thank you to the audience. Bye.